The generic term for a place where a person's remains or ashes are stored is haka in Japanese. The sonkeigo prefix o is often attached to it. Since haka in Japan are predominantly made of stone, the physical body of a haka is called hakaishi or boseki or sometimes bohi. Bohyo is any object that indicates the presence and location of a burial site. When someone's remains are buried in the ground without any stones over them, then that burial mound is called tsuka. The terms hunbo and hun'e are much less common. Byo, reibyo, or tamaya are a special type of haka where the souls of the ancestors are worshipped. These places are usually located within religious establishments, such as shrines and temples. A communal place where people's haka are gathered is called bochi, hakaba, bosho, boen, or reien. No kotsudo is a building in which urns containing ashes are kept. There are also some special terms for the haka of kings and emperors, namely ryo or ryobo. In particular, the burial mounds that are found scattered across Japan, dating back to the Kohun period, are called kohun. In English, a grave is a hole dug in the ground in which a person's remains are placed. There need not be any stones, signs, or structures above the grave. On the other hand, a tomb is an object or a structure that either contains or stands over someone's remains. A tomb could be a simple stone, called a tombstone or a gravestone, or even a colossal structure like the Great Pyramid of Giza or the Taj Mahal. The English language also boasts an abundance of terms for a burial site. For example, a mound, a barrow, and a tumulus all refer to a pile of earth or stones over someone's remains. A cemetery is a place where a number of people are buried. A graveyard is a cemetery that is usually adjacent to a church. A vault is a chamber in which dead bodies are stored. A crypt is also a chamber for dead bodies, but it is usually located underneath a church. A mausoleum is a freestanding building in which the remains of several individuals are placed. A cenotaph is a public monument to honor a dead person, but it doesn't contain any remains of the dead person. A necropolis is a cemetery of an ancient city. Catacombs are underground tunnels and chambers in which dead bodies are laid. An ossuary is a place where the bones of the deceased are stored. A columbarium is a chamber or a building in which the ashes of the dead are kept in urns. Sepulchre is an archaic term for a stone structure in which a dead person is buried. Charnel is another archaic term for a structure for keeping the bodies of the dead. Both jam and marmalade are widely consumed in Japan, and we call them jamu and marmaredo, respectively. Jam is a preserve of the flesh and the juice of a fruit, or sometimes a vegetable, usually cut into pieces or crushed, which are then boiled with sugar. Marmalade is created through a very similar process, but marmalade refers to a preserve of a citrus fruit, and typically contains the peel of the fruit. I hear that in some languages, these two types of preserves are not distinguished. I'm curious to learn what they are called in your language. In Japanese, the term jido usually refers to children in primary schools. Gakudo is another word for children of the same age group. Seito is a generic term for someone who studies at school, but this term technically refers to a person studying in a secondary school. Gakusei is another generic word for someone who studies, but technically it is specifically for a person who studies at a college or a university. Gakuto is a less common term that can mean either seito or gakusei, but it can also mean a researcher or a scholar, although we normally use gakusha to refer to researchers and scholars. In English, student is a generic term for someone who studies. In casual speech, it is often used to refer to people of all ages who study. However, in some countries and in some contexts, a student can be defined more narrowly as someone who engages in tertiary education as opposed to primary or secondary education. In contrast, a pupil is often defined as someone who receives primary or, in some countries, secondary education. A pupil can also be a child in a nursery school or kindergarten. The term pupil often connotes a minor who needs to be taught and supervised directly by a teacher or a tutor. Finally, in part 1, I forgot to mention another pair of creatures that are similar: frogs and toads. According to an article on Reptile Guide, frogs and toads belong to the same taxonomic order, Anura, and in fact, toads are a subtype of frogs. I will hereafter refer to frogs that are not toads simply as frogs. The article identifies 3 main differences between frogs and toads. 1. Skin. Frogs are usually said to have smooth, wet skin, whereas toads commonly have bumpy, dry skin. This difference has implications on their habitats. Frogs generally cannot live too far away from water, while toads can venture into drier locations. 2. Eggs. Frog spawn tends to cluster together to form clumps, whereas toad spawn looks like long strings. 3. Bodies. Frogs have leaner bodies and longer hind legs, which allow them to move more quickly and jump farther. The body of a toad, on the other hand, is chunkier and is therefore more suited for crawling on the ground. In Japanese, all members of the order Anura are called kaeru or kawazu if you want to sound old-fashioned. Frogs and toads are usually not distinguished, but frogs with green, wet skin that are often seen during the rainy season are called amagaeru, or literally rain frogs, while brown toads with warty skin are called hikigaeru, gamagaeru, or ibogaeru.